Raymond Shaw, made to commit acts too unspeakable to be cited here by an enemy who had captured his mind and his soul.
Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to Historica Esoterica. I am your friend, Roswell, and I'm joined by...
your enemy, Matt K. Ultra.
Hello, Matt. So,
hello, Roswell.
Today we're doing something a little bit different. We're talking... Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, we were originally, the original conceit of the show, so you're going to trade off between the more historical things or conspiracy things and the more esoteric things. And then we realized we didn't want to make it so that Roswell always had to like research evil spirits and things like that.
Yeah, please.
And so we've added a third category that we're going to be trading off, which is art of any variety.
Yeah, it's an excuse for us to watch movies and read comic books, really.
Yeah, we can be lazy.
Yeah, a little lazy. Although, to be fair, this was probably one of the more research-heavy episodes I did, ironically.
Yeah, I did go a little crazy on this one.
We'll get into that. But today, well, and actually before we start, I do want to say this might be a little bit of a departure in terms of us agreeing with each other.
I am almost certain it will be, yeah.
Our good friend Post pointed out that he was surprised that on our first two episodes, we didn't seem as contrasting as he'd expected based on our two personalities. Yeah. So this might be the one where we sort of split ideologically a little bit.
Yeah, and we're also entering the realm where, you know, the last two episodes, my research, I could point to a source for almost all of it. I could follow it back. A couple of the claims that I found in some of these books, I was like, I do not see a footnote on this one, but I believe it anyway.
Which is, you know, fair enough.
Which is my right, technically.
It is your right as a red-blooded American. Another thing we had talked about when we had conceived the show is that how, and this was more of a joke, but we're kind of in our own Cold War, where you're trying to make me Marxist and I'm trying to make you Christian. So we'll see how that goes. So
far, buddy, you might be winning.
Balls in my court. We'll see how it goes. But this might be the one that changes everything. But anyway, all of that out of the way, we are talking today about the Manchurian Candidate, which was a book and then a film and then another film, and then not very much talked about aside from being referenced in politics. But before we continue, I do want to throw up a little content warning. Just some brief mentions of self-harm, suicide, child abuse, sexual abuse. Very light. Don't go into it. No details. But if you're not in the mood for that today, maybe stop here.
Yeah, and we don't blame you, to be clear.
Yeah, no, it's cool.
Just turn down your volume and let the episode play out, though. We do want the numbers.
Or send Matt $10.
Yeah, hey. Do that one, actually. Yeah. If you tap out because of the content warning, just give me $10 and I'll call it even.
Okay, but let's go ahead and get into it. The Manchurian Candidate is a political thriller. It was originally a book. Do you want to talk about the book a little bit first, Matt?
Yeah. So it was published in 1959 by one Richard Condon. And more than the other Manchurian Candidates, it's sort of it looks like it was a satire. So full disclosure, I started reading it and then decided not to read it. It's 300 pages and I was like, well, maybe I don't want to do this much work.
At least not this much work about something you're not interested in compared to what we'll talk about later.
Like, I don't want to do this much work for something where I could also watch a movie.
Yeah, exactly.
But the first movie, one starring Frank Sinatra, was made in 1962, and it very closely follows the plot.
Yeah.
So we can honestly, if you want, we can just jump into the plot of the first movie.
Yeah, and I
And
think
then-
what we'll do is we'll kind of go through the plot of the first movie, just so we don't spend, talk about both of them back to back, and maybe any big departures or
Yeah.
memorable things from the remake we can just mention as we go along.
Yeah, that sounds good.
But yeah, so the book was made in 1959, and then it was made into a movie in 1962. Like you said, it was starring Frank Sinatra, Lawrence Harvey, who some people might recognize from Columbo, Angela Lansbury, James Gregory, who some people might recognize from Columbo, and Janet Leigh, who some people might recognize from being Jamie Lee Curtis's mom, or also Columbo. So I figured I had to mention all of that.
Picking up on a theme here.
Yeah, it was funny because I was watching that movie and I was like, oh, I was literally that meme of Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the screen with every Columbo cameo. I was like, oh.
I think thinking of them as Columbo cameos and not just
Yeah, and not
actors.
just famous actors. Yeah, Janet Leigh, who was in Psycho. But that was literally my first thought. I was like, oh, Columbo.
The 1962 one is funny because it was sort of filmed before they invented good acting. And so
Yes.
there's some scenes that are really good and like to this day work pretty well. Like,
Right.
the scene where the communists reveal their evil plot
Yeah.
is one that I quite like.
That was good.
But then there's other scenes where like, you're like, wow, I don't think you did a single take before they recorded this.
A lot of it was just like just having a transatlantic accent. That was acting back in the 60s. Although I will say Lawrence Harvey did. I do like him as an actor.
Yeah, and I like Frank Sinatra as a singer, despite my great-grandfather, the same one actually, who we have a photograph of him with Bing Crosby. He beefed with Frank Sinatra, just quick sidebar, because
That's so funny.
He worked as a lounge singer, and to the end of his days, he swore that Sinatra like sent mobbed up goons to put him out of business and keep him from like getting like the same level of fame that Frank achieved later in life.
I believe it.
Yeah, which if you know much about Frank Sinatra, not outside of the realm of possibility.
Although knowing a lot about you, and considering
say,
the paranoid streak.
I was gonna say, also possible that he was just an insane Irish Catholic who believed that happened and just didn't ever get big.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, so I mean, I don't want to make this a review of this movie,
Yeah.
but so just to get it out of the way so we don't get too much into it, I'll say my thoughts real quick and then you can say your thoughts. I think the original one, personally, as a movie, is better than the remake, but I don't think either of them are that strong, but they have some very interesting concepts and they have some great acting.
Mhm.
They're also, I feel like the 60s one, I was having that like feeling of like, oh, this must have been before movies were good. And then I
Yeah.
realized I've watched movies from the 30s that are like better filmed than this. So it's just kind of like, okay,
It's like, yeah, this just
it's just
wasn't
kind of
great.
mediocre. Yeah. So that's my thoughts.
Yeah, so yeah, my thoughts are pretty similar. I don't think either of them are like masterpieces. I think maybe just because it's a little more modern, so it's it's a language that I speak
Sure.
more, so to speak.
Yeah.
The 2004 one I think was just more fun to watch.
Interesting.
Because I could when I recognized the actors, it was like from other movies I had seen and not
Right.
like from
Columbo.
like not from Columbo or going like, yes, my great grandfather hated him.
Yeah, that's fair. That's very fair.
I will say, I think, I mean, Denzel Washington is just an incredible actor. So
he's the best out of both of those casts.
Yeah, so it's difficult for me to like say that I didn't love the film. I didn't love the film, but it's difficult for me to say that when it's led by Denzel Washington.
He's very compelling.
He's a very compelling actor.
Yeah. So yeah, let's just kind of go through the broad strokes of the plot. And again, this is going to be following the 1962's plot, and they differ in a lot of ways. I think the big one is that the modern one takes place during the Gulf War, so the enemy isn't the scary communist; it's people in the desert, and also capitalism.
Yeah,
weirdly enough,
it's a very 2004 movie because the villains are Hillary Clinton and also global corporations, but as there's also like scary Muslims in the desert. You're like, okay, well,
who work for Hillary Clinton?
Yeah, it's like I agree with some of these villains.
Yeah,
like, yes, Hillary Clinton and the evil corporations for sure, but why'd we drag these guys into it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, so that being said, our first one takes place in the right after the Korean War.
Hmm.
So in the 50s. And the beginning is that a troop of soldiers, of US soldiers, a platoon, get captured by Soviet and Chinese soldiers and taken to Manchuria.
Which already is really funny. If you know anything about just like the way that Maoists and Stalinists got along at the time, it's very funny to imagine the Soviets and the Chinese going like, yeah, we'll work together on this one to capture these Americans and take them to Manchuria.
Oh, that's interesting. So, see, I didn't look into the much of the history of the Korean War on this one, so I didn't realize that those two groups
Yeah,
weren't
it was
buddy buddy.
yeah, it was very much a China and Korea fight. The Soviets
Okay.
didn't do much. But yeah, that
Okay.
I'd like to note. Yeah, so I had one note about like the movie other than the first movie other than its plot, which is portraits of Stalin and Mao next to each other. LOL. Is what I wrote down.
Cool. Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that. Like, that's the type of stuff I didn't even
Yeah.
notice
So
as
it's just
not
sort
an
of the
expert in it.
vague communist conspiracy.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, and I will say that is sort of the tone of this, where it's like, look how spooky these commies are. Is
yeah.
definitely, at least with the movie. I don't know if like the book is a little more ironic with it, considering it's supposedly a satire. Although I doubt it. It was written by a white guy in the 50s, so chances are no. But yeah. So the vague enemy is communism, and we see these guys get captured. But then 3 days later, our two main heroes, Sergeant Raymond Shaw and Captain Bennett Marco, return to UN lines, somehow victorious, and Shaw is awarded a Medal of Honor for saving his soldiers' lives through combat. Although a few were killed in action. Put a pin in that, we'll come back. Then there's a very, very interesting scene where Raymond Shaw comes back to America, and he's the son of a woman who's married to a senator, Senator Iselin, who's kind of like this McCarthy-esque character.
Yeah, he like one of the first things we see him do is like accuse a guy of being a member of the Communist Party when he says
Exactly.
that the Navy doesn't need to be like twice the size it is.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. Which, oh boy.
yeah.
But yeah, so basically we get some tensions where it's like Raymond doesn't really like his mom. His mom's kind of this very kind of conniving political figure who's driving her husband, who's kind of sort of adult. He's kind of a doofus.
He's an idiot.
He's an absolute fool. But like she's kind of savvily navigating him like into a position of power. And she's using her son's, exploits as obviously good press. And that's kind of where they come back. And now, having been in the US for a time, Marco, who's kind of our main character, starts having a reoccurring nightmare where he sees. And this was actually probably the most interesting scene of the.
Oh yeah, like visually speaking, this one was genuinely very fun to watch. I liked that one a lot.
It was cool because so supposedly the communists have figured out a way to hypnotize and brainwash this entire platoon. And so the platoon thinks they're all sitting in this boring like gardening convention
She's
of like
talking about,
old
like
nice ladies.
hydrangeas.
Yeah, and so they're all sitting bored, and we're getting the camera panning back and forth very artistically, switching between these old ladies who are supposedly talking about gardening, but they're actually talking about like communist brainwashing. And then the camera will flip, and suddenly they're all generals and intelligence officers for China and Russia
And
or
then
whatever.
sometimes they're like in the room, but it's the old ladies, and sometimes
Yes.
like they're in the office, but it's the anyway. It's very well done.
It's
I
very well
enjoyed it.
done. And I will say they actually do show a little bit of the tension between Russia and China there. And I mean, it's
Yeah,
boiled down to two characters being kind of like, oh, you at each other. But now that you've pointed that out, I did recognize that. But yeah, the most interesting thing is that they're showing off like, yeah, we can tell these people to do whatever they want, especially Raymond. He's like the perfect,
Mhm.
I guess, soldier. So they have him kill two of the other soldiers, the unnamed soldiers, without batting an eye, and nobody thinks anything of it.
Yeah, they talk about like his like latent, like violent and antisocial urges, and how those made him like
Mhm.
the prime candidate to be programmed. And also, it's why like no one else in the platoon likes him.
Yeah.
Which they hammer in a little more in the remake, where there's like a scene. It's a little on the nose, but they're like all having a party in the back of the truck, and then Shaw walks in, and they all instantly fall silent and like turn
Yeah.
off the music, and then just like
Yeah.
stare at him.
Yeah. They all turn off like the best 1990s rap beat ever.
Yeah,
while playing
I don't remember what
cards.
it was, but I like recognized it. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, yo, but
But in
um,
the 60s version, they're all just in like a Chinese brothel.
yeah,
And he just
which
like
also
comes and yells
rocks.
at them, which is like, all right, that's interesting that they show. There's a few things where I'm like, it's very interesting that they chose to put this in a Hollywood movie in the 60s, but you know,
Yeah,
the early 60s being said. But yeah, so anyway, the idea that they've been caught and programmed, and so Marco kind of comes to this conclusion that he's having this nightmare. And at first, like the army intelligence, like they don't really buy it, and then they find out some of the other soldiers have it. So Marco sort of gets put in charge of a task force, essentially. Um, and then meanwhile, Eleanor, which is Raymond's mom, is like masterminding this plot to get her husband to the vice presidency, essentially.
hmm
And kind of Raymond's kind of being all moody about it. But we see him get triggered for the first time by calling him and suggesting he play solitaire, and then when he pulls a queen of diamonds, that activates him and causes him to go about his crimes. I'm gonna skip over some of this stuff because I don't really care about Raymond Shaw's romance with the other senator's daughter.
Yeah,
And-
he's briefly like in love with the other senator's daughter,
Yeah.
and then all right, skip. Just imagine you're sitting with your cool older brother, like the one who like fast forwarded through all the talking scenes
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing right now.
We're going straight to the Duel
Um,
of the Fates.
Yeah, we're going straight to Duel of the Fates, and then Anakin blows up the ship, and then they all fly home,
Yeah.
and then that's the movie.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, so we'll fast forward to I guess like just very briefly, one of the Chinese guys that helped capture them like comes to start working for Raymond Shaw. I put that in air quotes because obviously he's watching him or
Raymond
whatever.
Shaw's working for him.
Yeah, and he's
Dun,
like
dun,
being
dun.
his not valet, but like his little boy that he tells to do stuff. I don't know what you call
Yeah.
it. His little butler.
His boy.
His boy, I don't know. But then like Marco like comes into Raymond Shaw's house because he's kind of like suspicious of him. Because another thing I forgot to mention is all the people have been repeating the same thing whenever Raymond Shaw's mentioned. They all say Raymond Shaw's the kindest, bravest, warmest, most wonderful human being I've ever known in my life, which is funny considering everyone hated him, right?
Yeah, that's my favorite thing. Is once Marco's really starting to get suspicious of him. In the remake, he's a little more of a sympathetic character. Where like, it's like, oh, he never had a chance. But in the original, he's like, I don't feel that way about him. I don't even like him.
Yeah.
I hate him. He sucks.
Which is pretty based to hear Frank Sinatra say that.
Yeah.
Which makes it like a lot more interesting. Where you're like, oh, okay. So it's like, so why do I always say that? That kind of that's interesting. That's sort of like what uncovers this plot for Marco is that everybody says the same thing. But anyway, so because of that, Marco's come to Raymond's house to like monitor him. He recognizes the boy, the Chinese boy, and then like they do a little fight, and it's like, okay, whatever. And then Marco meets his love interest, who really doesn't matter to the plot, so we're not going to talk about her. It's Janet Leigh. Yeah, whatever. Who cares? But anyway, Raymond has a brief romance with the daughter of a senator who's like opposed to his mother and his father's political side. So we find out that Raymond Shaw's mother, Eleanor, actually knows how to trigger him. And so she, pulls the cards and sends him to kill the senator in his home. And so as he does that, he kills the senator, and Jocelyn like finds him doing it, so he kills her too. And it's like very tragic, blah blah blah.
You're like, oh no.
Oh, sad.
Oh, not Jocelyn.
Not Jocelyn, who
we knew so much about her.
Exactly.
So realistically
we saw her in a 60s full bathing suit,
Yeah.
sitting by the side of the beach when they had a flashback. Whatever. So anyway, I'm doing it. I'm terrible at explaining movies, so I feel like I got the worst job here. I apologize, but
I feel bad because I didn't watch this one very thoroughly. I was
It's
doing
all
my
right.
notes while watching this. So
I
was
did
like,
wanna-
you can lead the charge on that.
I did want to point out the difference between this scene and the modern one scene.
Yes,
Because-
this
okay,
is
This is
yeah,
wild.
we were on the same page.
All right, good. So in the scene where Raymond kills the senator and his daughter in the 2004 remake, he comes out to see the senator on his like lakeside house, and the senator's kayaking. So he goes and flips his kayak, drowns him, and makes it look like an accident, and also kills Jocelyn. What did you think about this scene, Matt?
I just thought it was crazy that 2 weeks after we discuss,
Yep.
a head of an intelligence operation dying mysteriously in a kayaking accident, we
Yeah.
get the scene where a guy looks too much into an intelligence operation
Yes.
and dies mysteriously in a kayaking
Yes.
accident.
William Colby, specifically, for those of you who listened to last week's episode on the OSS.
Yeah.
And he had died in 1996, I think. So it's about 8 years before this.
Yeah. And I don't know if that was an intentional parallel or just really, really lucky timing.
I was looking for interviews with the writer of the modern version or like anything on it. I couldn't find anything. So I'm like, I don't know if it's just a, what do you call that? A synchronicity or what,
Yeah.
but pretty strange.
One other note about the remake. When Marco's first like getting suspicious, he's talking with that senator before he gets killed.
Yes.
And the senator's like, your evidence consists entirely of your spotty memory, things you pulled off of the internet, and a crazy man's journal. And I was like, well,
that's your
evidence.
He
really is speaking to me too.
But here's
just
the thing.
like Marco, I'm right.
He was, yes. And so that guy got, he got his comeuppance for not believing
he was killed by the assassin.
He was drowned in a canoe. Was that John Voight? I think it was John Voight.
I believe so.
Yeah.
Let me remember. Yeah.
Who is like now uploading videos to like impeach Biden or something, which is like the lamest thing an actor can do.
It's really funny watching the trajectories of actors from this era. You're like, man, buddy.
Boy. But yeah, so anyway, Raymond kills the senator at his mother's bidding because it helped, I guess he was going to like make some political move to block her husband from, I don't know. But anyway.
He's going to try and keep him out of the vice presidency.
Exactly. So, and the idea is that they're going to get the plan. I'll just cut to the plan for the climax is that Eleanor, I guess, is somehow involved with the Chinese. And the plan is they're going to get this McCarthy-esque senator to the vice presidency and use Raymond to assassinate the president so that obviously their choice becomes the president. And he's going to install an authoritarian regime after, this murder of a president. He's going to use that as his, I guess, basis for kind of cracking down. And I don't know if that sounds familiar to anybody, but, cracking down on freedom. And yeah,
I can't imagine it.
That's the big bad evil plan. Another difference, I get, this is actually a difference from the novel and this movie. I didn't read the novel, but I saw this noted and I had to track it down, which was that in the novel, it's obviously a little more fleshed out. So Eleanor and Raymond travel abroad and he actually kills more political figures.
Interesting.
But the movie adaptations omit the novel's portrayal of incest between Raymond and his mother, really only hinting at it with a kiss in both versions.
Yeah, where she just sort of gives him a little smooch.
She brainwashes and then she kisses him on the lips, and you're like, I mean, I think if you were just like a normal person watching it and not researching it, you'd be like, well, that's kind of weird, but mothers do that kind of stuff, so it's like, oh, they're just kind of weird.
Yeah, but if you're like Roswell and I, you immediately know what that's supposed to mean. You're like, okay.
Yes, and in the book, they actually, I'll just say, in the book, it's revealed that Mrs. Iceland, Eleanor, was sexually abused by her father and fell in love with him and idolized him even after he died. And then towards the end of the book, as she has hypnotized him, he reminds him of her father and they sleep together, which is
not ideal.
Yeah, not ideal.
If I may speak on that, don't do that, everybody.
No, cut it out.
The Manchurian Candidate. Don't do this to your son. Don't do any of the things that she does in this book.
And if you're a son and you see your mom coming by with a deck of playing cards and she's connected to the communists or something, run. That's
Yeah.
But yeah, obviously that stands up to us, like, and of course, we'll cover stuff like that later on, like Epstein and Franklin scandal and the McMartin preschool trial and all that stuff. But like cycles of child abuse among elite circles, right? That just immediately snapped my head.
Yeah, especially as relates to MK adjacent stuff. It's
right.
It's interesting. It's something that makes you raise your eyebrows when it pops up, especially in something that early. You're like, how did you know about this?
And I was trying to find anything on it, and it's nobody mentions it except like book content warnings, like for parents. where it's like, yes,
Great.
there's incest. And I'm like, does nobody have a thought about how strange this is? Or is it
Yeah.
just like provocative? I don't know. So that's another thing. And they're having a big rally as the president's going to be elected, and Raymond's got to sneak in, and he's got his sniper rifle up in the crow's nest, and Marco's rushing to try and stop him before he can shoot the president-to-be. And he doesn't get there in time, but the twist is that Raymond actually shoots his mother and his stepfather, and right as Marco bursts in, and he goes, nobody could have stopped this, so I had to take matters into my own hands, and then he self-kills. So that's sort of the plot. And then we've got like a ending scene where Marco just like goes, "Oh, it's really sad." And then he looks out a window and it ends. So
Yeah, and he's like, the lack of emotion on my face just means how sad I am, really.
yes.
And so, yeah, this is the thing. The ending for the 2004 film goes crazy, which is to say that Marco goes to confront Raymond before the convention, and effectively, it's implied like gets just jumped by Raymond's men or some like the mysterious corporation's men,
Right.
and he becomes the guy from Manchuria instead, and he's perched up during the political rally, and Raymond is on stage. But in the critical moment, Raymond steps in front of the gun, preventing Marco from taking the shot, and then turns himself and his mother towards the gun. And so Marco shoots them both instead. And then this is where it really gets wild. So, Marco attempts to shoot himself, but is stopped by an FBI agent who wounds him before he can.
Right.
And then the FBI frames a contractor for the evil company that actually did it as the assassin, which reveals the plot. While Marco just sort of goes off to decompress and get deprogrammed, off in back in Kuwait where he was originally programmed, and do his healing process. And somehow this works. But I don't know, just watching someone shoot a notable public figure and then the FBI framing someone else and conveniently using that to take down a group that they were working on taking down anyway, I was like, huh, this is prescient.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, see, I only, again, because I watched 2/3 of this movie and then read the rest on Wikipedia, I didn't think too much about that as I breezed over the thing. But that is, now that you mention it, I'm like, that's very interesting. That's very, very interesting.
The guy that they frame is white, and there's just an insane scene where it's it's 2004 level technology.
Right.
But there's a scene where they show them editing the video footage, and it shows there's footage of him raising his hands as he's getting scanned with a metal detector, and the guy they is white, and so you see them pixel by pixel recolor the guy's hands so they're white, and it's just, I don't know, that was just insane. I was like, why did we include this in the movie? This didn't need to be there.
That's not how Photoshop works.
Yeah, and they just put a different guy's head on, and then all of a sudden the whole thing's fixed. But
that's strange.
Anyway, they're both fun watches.
Yeah, they're all right.
Not great.
Nothing amazing.
Say.
Oh, another thing about the 2004 one is that there was also chips, tracking chips put into the soldiers, which they dig out. He digs out with a little knife. So that's strange. Yeah.
So instead of the the hypnotism, there's a little bit of that, but also it's microchips. They're microchip because it's 2004. We're in the future now.
Exactly. If this movie was made now, you know what it would be? It'd be vaccines.
That's right. Yeah. They vaccinate all of the soldiers, and then suddenly they're remorseless killers. But it's, I don't know. It's just interesting how they're it's the future. No more traumatizing people through generations of sculpted abuse and turning them into dissociative personalities that we can utilize. No, we just use microchips now, much cheaper. Okay.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, and big tubes they connect to their brain, and they sit them down in those hairdresser things like you see at ladies' hairdresser shops from the 50s. Anyway, so hopefully that was intelligible. I think we got all the important points out. Maybe not the best recap of a movie ever, but we weren't super interested in the movies themselves. I think it's safe to say, right?
Yeah, it was. We were both, the whole time we were watching the movie, we were like, this reminds me of the other thing I want to talk about on the show other than this.
Yes, so the obviously the focus for us was the themes, specifically the brainwashing and programming to kill, if you will.
Interesting wording.
But yeah, so just now that we've got through the plot, just a couple more things about the movie. This movie was a flop. Who would have thought? It failed to recover its cost. It was pulled from distribution 2 years later after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, which is interesting. We'll probably come back to that. Also, another thing is the author, Richard Condon, who wrote the original book, not a lot on him. His Wikipedia page, very sparse, and there was not a lot of materials I could find about him readily available on the internet that really told anything of interest or note. But
yeah,
I'll paint you a little broad picture. He was born in New York in 1915. He was part of the U.S. Merchant Marines, which I didn't know what that was. Apparently, that's just Marines they put on a boat for, like to carry merchandise, and they don't do anything.
Yeah, I was gonna say Merchant Marines sounds like much more ominous than it actually is.
No, it's like they're put on merchant vessels just to kind of like help them out, I guess. And then like if there's
like pirates show up,
sure. And then like if there's wartime, they can commandeer the vessel and join the fray, essentially. But yeah,
which that's gotta suck. You're there shipping like bananas,
yeah,
and all of a sudden they're like, "Sorry, we got to take this to Germany. We need to land on the shores of Normandy."
And yeah, exactly. So, and I'm guessing that was during World War II, based on the fact that he was born in 1915. So
yeah, just his general lifespan. That's what I assumed as well. I didn't actually check, but that was my guess.
There wasn't anything that said specifically that he served in a war. It just said he served in the Merchant Marines, at least on Wikipedia, which was my source. But another source I pulled says before he was a novelist, he was actually a movie publicist, which I thought was interesting. Originally working for Walt Disney and then moving to United Artists before leaving the business. And apparently he wrote the book, The Manchurian Candidate, with a movie adaptation deal in mind already. So that was the kind of author he was. He was a commercial author, I guess.
Yeah. I was going to say, working for someone like Walt Disney and then immediately leaving and writing The Manchurian Candidate, it's like,
yeah.
I don't know how in tune with the movie world you were, Richard Condon, but you seem to have picked up on something that was going on.
I guess, yeah. And my original thought when I was researching this is like, I want to know who this guy is, where he comes from, how he could have this idea pre-MK Ultra, again, stuff we'll get into, but this idea of like brainwashing and programming to turn people into killers for the state or whatever. How he could have this big lofty idea that would forever inform lingo. Like people use the term Manchurian Candidate to reference that sort of thing in everyday speak.
Yeah.
So I was like, who is this guy? I was like, did he work for the military? Like I was expecting to find something on him, and apparently he was just a dude. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Trying to find stuff about him, because I went on that same journey where I was like, not much. I did find one thing that we'll get into when we get to my section of our research.
Sure.
So yeah, now we're gonna do just a little to give you guys a roadmap as to where we're going ahead. Roswell is going to take us on a journey through brainwashing, particularly as it relates to what we were afraid the communists were doing.
Yes.
And then from there, I'm going to take us on a tour of the brainwashing that I'm afraid we were doing at the time.
Okay. Yes. So my main source was the book Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism by Robert J. Lifton. It's a psychology book from the 50s. We'll get into that in a second. I have a few quotes that I just want to read straight up top.
Yeah, for sure.
About kind of the origin of like the term brainwashing and like the concept in the American psyche, what it means, sort of where it came from. So here's the first quote. It says, quote, "Fear of communist brainwashing seems an example of Cold War hysteria. But in the 1950s, the fear was not without basis. United Nations ground forces began military action in Korea on July 5th, 1950. On July 9th, an American soldier who had been captured just 2 days earlier delivered a radio speech consisting of North Korean propaganda. Similar broadcasts by captured soldiers continued throughout the war. At the end of the war, the Army estimated that 1 out of every 7 American prisoners of war had collaborated with the enemy. The final generally accepted estimate is 1 out of 10. 21 Americans refused to return to the United States, 40 announced that they had become communists, and 14 were court-martialed, and 11 of those were convicted." End quote. That comes from the article, The Best Bad Novel, the New York Times, which is about the Manchurian Candidate. But yeah, so that's kind of the initial thought when you think brainwashing, especially in the 50s and 60s, like Red Scare stuff, right?
Mhm.
But there was a legitimate cause for it. So here's a quote, some selected quotes from the book I talked about by Robert J. Lifton about brainwashing. So, quote, "It was first used by an American journalist, Edward Hunter, as a translation of the colloquialism, 'see now'?" Excuse me if that pronunciation's bad, but that means literally wash brain, which he quoted
All
from
right, that
Chinese
works.
informants who described its use following the communist takeover. Brainwashing soon developed a life of its own. Originally used to describe indoctrination techniques, it quickly applied to Russian and Eastern European approaches, and then just about anything which the communists did anywhere. Inevitably, the word made its appearance closer to home, as when Southern segregationists accused all who favor racial equality, including the United States Supreme Court, of having been influenced by left-wing brainwashing.
Interesting.
There is a more responsible, even tortured self-examination which leads professional people to ask whether they, in their own activities, might not be guilty of brainwashing. Educators about their teaching, psychiatrists about their training and their psychotherapy, theologians about their own reform methods. Whatever its setting, thought reform consists of two basic elements: confession, the exposure and renunciation of past and present evil, and re-education, the remaking of a man in the communist image. These elements are closely related and overlapping, since they both bring into play a series of pressures and appeals, intellectual, emotional, and physical, aimed at social control and individual change, end quote. And again, that was from Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. So, pretty interesting, I think. And I thought for 1950s, I did expect this book to be a little more like Evil Communists.
Raging. Yeah.
Yeah, but he seems to have kind of a pretty, I would say, level look.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, before I forget though, I would
Sure.
like to say, I don't remember the name of the episode off the top of my head, but Jimmy Fallon Gong, friend of the show, and mutual on Twitter, his podcast, Program to Chill, has a great episode about the Korean brainwashing scare in particular.
Yeah.
And that phenomenon of American soldiers defecting at such crazy rates.
Ooh,
Because,
yeah.
little interesting note, I have not done as much research into this as him, but a lot of the brainwashing was Americans stating that we were using biochemical warfare against the Koreans,
Interesting.
which is something that the government was denying and just saying, they've been brainwashed to believe this.
Interesting. Yeah.
So highly recommend, just look up Program to Chill Korea. I'm sure you'll
Yeah.
find it.
I wish I would have got the chance to listen to that. And sorry for laughing at the name. You said it right as I took a drink of something. It almost killed me.
No, it's one of those names where I didn't realize the pun in the name until I said it out loud the first time. I was like, oh, that's pretty clever.
That's pretty good. So yeah, that is interesting. And that was kind of a thing I was trying to sidestep as I was looking at all of this, which I'm sure when you're trying to make people communists, in the 50s, the Americans are going to be like, well, no American's going to be a communist. That's ridiculous. But the more modern level take is to be like, yeah, I'm sure the communists were like, here's some of our ideas. And a couple of those boys were like, all right, not bad.
Yeah, I was going to say, you failed to consider everybody that, the North Koreans were just correct in the war and justified in everything they did.
Well,
so
I don't know about all that.
So naturally, we just immediately switched sides.
But anyway, continuing on with this book, the background of this book is that in Hong Kong, Robert Lifton interviewed 25 Westerners and 15 Chinese subjects who had all had experiences with thought reform. And two Western interviewees in particular, Dr. Vincent and Father Luca, who we'll talk about a little bit, were both subjected to the same sequence of psychological pressures. And this is being held in separate prisons, far removed from each other, despite differences in their response to reform and despite their differences in personal and professional lifestyles. So it's kind of a similar tactic used on these two very different people, separated from each other.
Yeah.
The pattern was actually consistent in all 25 Westerners Lifton interviewed. I think there was some departures in the Chinese interviewees, but I didn't focus too much on that. But anyway, he separated it into 12 psychological steps, which I'm going to briefly touch on. Each of them had about a chapter associated with them, so I did my best to boil it down to a little sentence or paragraph to give you the general idea. So again, I'm a layman in terms of psychology.
Yeah.
a real doofus when it comes to this stuff, so I did my best, but it'll give you the idea. But the subjects who were captured by communists and held in prisons were told that the reactionary spy who entered the prison must perish and that a new man must be resurrected in the communist mold. So they are the reactionary spy, and that person's going to die, and a communist is going to be born. And though the subjects obviously resisted, there was no way of sidestepping this change due to their environment. They were forced against their will to participate in all of this until they inside themselves began to feel a need to reform. So, understanding that, we'll quickly touch on these 12 steps. The first is the assault upon identity. So Dr. Vincent was told that he was not really a doctor, and Father Luca's religious beliefs were attacked. So imagine you're being held in a prison, and you're being told what you believe, your identity is no good, right? Or even further, that what you think of yourself is not true. Kind of a gaslighting type of situation.
Yeah.
Number 2 is the establishment of guilt. Both the doctor and the father found themselves unanimously condemned by a seemingly infallible environment. The message of guilt which they received was both existential, you are guilty, and psychologically demanding, you must learn to feel guilty. So again, you're in this place you can't escape, and you're being condemned from all sides. Number 3, the self-betrayal. The subjects were forced to denounce friends and colleagues and organizations that were vital to their identity, and in a sense, by doing this, they were betraying themselves subconsciously. Number 4 was the breaking point. As the psychological assaults continued, the prisoners begin to feel there's no escape and begin to fear total annihilation, which Lifton described as the basic fear. So, being killed, essentially. Yeah. Some of the prisoners may be brought to suicidal preoccupations and attempts at this time. 5 is leniency and opportunity. So amount of pressure is lifted from the subject, permitting them to see how they could achieve some degree of harmony with the outer world. So for example, on Christmas Day, Father Luca was given cigarettes and tea and treated nicely by his captors, who appeared to commiserate with his misery and urged him to make a confession just so they could close the case and end the punishment. So good cop situation, essentially. Mm-hmm. Number 6, the compulsion to confess. The prisoners had been told to confess or face destruction this entire time, and the compulsion continues to gain momentum, provoking an increased sense of submission. 7, the channeling of guilt. Once the compulsion to confess is operating, the prisoner is ready to learn a more precise formula. They channel non-specific feelings of guilt into a paranoid, pseudo-logical system. Their sense of evil, formerly vague and free-floating, is now made to do specific work for reform. So these vague feelings of guilt they're getting are now being kind of directed by their captors into specific. They're focused, yes. 8, logic dishonoring re-education. Both Dr. Vincent and Father Luca found that it was not communist doctrine per se which mattered, but rather the use of communist doctrine and its reasoning techniques to broaden their own self-exposure. Excuse me. It was no longer enough that they admit guilt, or even to feel guilty, or even to recognize specific guilty actions. The prisoner had to extend his self-condemnation to every aspect of his being, and learn to see his entire life as a series of shameful and evil acts. Shameful and evil not only in their possible opposition to communism, but also because they violated his own cherished ideals. I thought that was interesting.
Interesting. Yeah, that is interesting.
Like, you should feel bad, not only because you're not doing right by us, but you're also not doing right by you. Yeah, so number 9, progress and harmony. The prisoner's new self requires emotional nutrition if it is to continue to develop. This nutrient is supplied by the prisoner's achieving a sense of harmony with his no longer strange surroundings. That was just a direct quote from the book, because honestly, I didn't understand that section at all.
It's very funny that, it's like step 9, self-care.
Yeah, exactly. Step 10, final confession, the summing up. So now in this new atmosphere of harmony and reality, the prisoner is ready to make a conclusive statement of what they are and what they have been. The confession has long been developing, of course, but is likely to take final shape only after they have achieved sufficient, quote, progress to produce and believe in a correct version. 11 is rebirth. The prisoner is compelled once more to become themselves while simultaneously adopting their new beliefs. For example, Dr. Vincent became a physician and teacher once again, but at the same time, he became an advanced and sympathetic student of Chinese communism.
Interesting.
And then at the end, the reformers made it clear he should combine these two aspects of himself. He was expected to bring the scientific and technical emphasis of his profession to his study of communism and to carry over a progressive approach to his medical teaching. Number 12, the final one, is release, transition, and limbo. This is the longest one, so bear with me. Release and expulsion, as Dr. Vincent discovered, don't put an end to one's troubles. So after leaving the prison, he was thrust into an environment which immediately questions all that had been so painstakingly built up during these years of imprisonment that he endured. And he participated in a new identity crisis just as severe as the one experienced during incarceration. So, for example, upon arriving in Hong Kong, Dr. Vincent discovered that what he had become in prison was of absolutely no use to him in his new environment. Alone with his emotions, he found himself in a devastating predicament. He had internalized enough of his prison environment to feel a severe distrust of the non-communist world, but was sufficiently receptive to the evidence around him to be highly suspicious of the communist point of view as well. But the security he had known during the latter part of imprisonment had suddenly vanished, and so his identity is now shaken. And in this personal limbo, he was unable to feel safe or whole in either of these worlds, instead having felt deceived by both. And then he longed nostalgically for the simple, ordered, meaningful prison existence, which he now glorified in his memory, rose-tinted glasses. He could relinquish this longing only if he began to trust the new environment, this trust in turn depending on the capacity to trust himself. So once more, he undergoes a painful identity shift, encompassing what he had been before, in what he had become in prison, and what he has become in the process of release. So that's all of the steps, and essentially, I think we can sum that up in you've trapped someone, you're scaring the heck out of them, you're not treating them well, and you're lying to them, and then being a little nice. It's essentially just like, I hate to make it this, but it's essentially just like toxic behavior.
Yeah.
If you think about it.
Yeah, the brainwashing techniques used by the communists, low-key toxic.
A couple of girlfriends I had used similar techniques.
The Manchurian boyfriend.
Yeah. So the whole reason I mentioned all of this is because I wanted to figure out if brainwashing was real. And this and another newer textbook, which relied on this one, were really the only things I could find. And so, we think of brainwashing, you're imagining like tubes and pneumatic tubes and beeping like medical devices and surgeries to control someone's brain. But it's really more of kind of making people question reality and themselves, and starving people and beating people and
just conditioning them.
And at the end of all of this, Lifton concluded that long term, all of these tactics could be seen as a failure because all of these quote unquote converts eventually returned to the United States, and those who had come home praising the good life in North Korea soon reverted back to American views. So it wasn't like you've got your hands in their brain and now you control them like Raymond Shaw. They can do whatever you want. They're perfectly your puppet. No, it was more like you freak someone out, make them mentally ill for a couple years.
Yeah, and it requires constant upkeep, effectively.
Yeah, and essentially it's just about human survival. Like when we get into new situations, we've got to kind of stabilize and survive. And that's what was going on there. So also, another thing I didn't mention is a lot of these tactics, now they're more studied like in their use in like cults specifically. So like the idea of isolating people from the outside world, questioning anything, only feeding them your information, like attacking any beliefs they had, attacking their old identity, saying it's bad and that they need to become good, is how kind of cults quote unquote brainwash people, and sort of beat them into submission in terms of their ethos.
All I have to say about that is, fortunately, no cults have ever been tied to the CIA. So we can say for a fact that the CIA doesn't brainwash people.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I think the last thing I'll quote is, because like if you're a religious person, I think it's easy to go like, well, oh, is all religion, cult brainwashing? And the answer is no.
Yeah, absolutely not.
You're
to be
pretty
clear.
good. You're probably safe. If any of those 12 steps resonated with you, maybe be careful. But
Yeah.
as someone who has a faith, I was reading all over this. And I'm like, yeah, none of this applies to. This is
Yeah.
completely different than my experience. So like, my faith is fine. But I do want to read a quote.
When I went to church, I wasn't locked in a cage and not
Yeah.
given food until
Yes.
I renounced the outside world.
Right, exactly. Or if you look at some of these like what is it, Heaven's Gate, and like some of those things where it's like they become their own insular community, but it's more that not even that they're just insular, but like that like you can't question the authority. There's there's this level of control being exerted over not only your actions but also your thoughts. So if your church doesn't do that, you're probably chill. But I did want to read a quick quote about that, just because it was important to me, from Thoughts on Thought Control by Joe Simhart, which was just a review of the other brainwashing book I looked at by oh shoot, what was her name? Let me just Google that real quick.
It's very funny. For the first source, you forget to be the woman. You're like,
oh
man,
no,
some broad.
No, oh man, now you're making me feel terrible.
It's okay. Roswell definitely respects women, possibly more than I do. But
come on,
you can cut that.
No, it's fine. It's fine. There we go. It's from the book Brainwashing: The Science of Thought Control by physiologist Kathleen Taylor. And she quoted a lot from the Lifton book. That's why I didn't cover her material. But anyway, so this is a quote about that book and kind of about what she thinks about, faith in relation to brainwashing. So here it is. It says, quote, Taylor makes an important distinction that she feels is lost on many skeptics who have a knee-jerk reaction to religious practice and faith. She takes issue with those who believe that science functions like a well-regulated brain and religion like a psychotic one. To her, brain research demonstrates that much religious practice is not concerned with abstractions, but with real life, testing out new approaches to social problems, experimenting with novel solutions, learning and applying ideas from around the world. In other words, the more sophisticated faiths act reasonably within their ethereal core ideas. Taylor's concern is with any human venture, be it science, religion, or politics, that restricts brain function from creative stop-and-think activity, and which becomes little more than another exclusive cult. End quote. So the idea being that all of those steps and all of this psychological attack are to stop your brain from stopping and thinking, from taking a moment to go, wait a second, and consider it. And so if that's a kind of situation you're in, where it's like your brain is being controlled or cut off in terms of how people are telling you your thought patterns to develop, that's when you're in trouble.
Yeah, you should probably avoid that. But also, to face an unfortunate reality, if you're in that situation, there is no way that they're going to let you listen to this podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you're listening to us, you're probably good.
Escape. Come join me and Matt's cult.
Yeah, exactly. Join our bunker out in the deserts.
Yes, we do need to start a bunker. But anyway, so that's kind of the basic science behind brainwashing. I tried to look in some of the neurological stuff, and it's a lot of scientists just kind of brush this topic off.
Yeah, we'll go into my thoughts on neuroscience as a field sometime later, but
no.
We'll just say I take a less rosy view of it than many when it comes to thinking that it can do anything meaningful, frankly.
Interesting.
But now I've dropped that hot little take right there. We'll move on to something much less hot, which is to say, unless you've got anything else you want to cover.
No, that's the only other thing I have to cover. I think will feed into some of your more alternative speculations.
Yeah, so I'm going to start out with very official stuff, and I'll let you all know when I'm crossing over into when I've crossed the line of speculation of sorts. But so I'd just like to first outline a little bit of the stuff that we know that people did.
Right.
So first of all, of course, like I said, that plot, right, the idea of communists, specifically in the Korean War, brainwashing Americans, turn them into godless communists, is a it was a very real fear, and it was partially used to justify things like Project Artichoke, the predecessor to MK Ultra, and follow-up of Project Bluebird, which is pretty much the same thing, where the CIA experimented, among other things, with various mind control techniques, including the administration of LSD and uses of hypnosis, along with other charming little experiments like forced morphine addiction and withdrawal, and just trying out extended periods of isolation to see what it did to people. It's really cool how much of like this early period was just them going like, let's see what this one does.
I mean, that's the spirit of science, right? Is you're like, put somebody in a big metal box, see what happens.
However, before we get into that stuff, I would like to make just a quick sidebar. About dengue fever, a virus. It's transmitted usually by mosquito bites that the CIA was experimenting with as part of Project Artichoke.
Right.
So they released it from airplanes. They would fill bags with mosquitoes and then drop them onto a predominantly African-American low-income community in Florida. They had like newly built public housing units, and they did that so they could test things like the virality of the disease, the mosquito bite rates, and things like that. They did this in the 50s. I forgot to write down the exact year.
And I know the answer to this, but I'm just going to have to ask for posterity. I'm assuming these low-income African-American Section 8 housing, deal didn't know this was happening and were not...
Oh, yeah, no, they were not informed. They later on, people sort of put it together where they realized that, like, at the time these experiments were being done, there were outbreaks of dengue fever, which is not a particularly common disease in Florida.
Right.
It only really had outbreaks around this time. Then again in the 80s, where notably in 1981, Cuba experienced an incredibly intense and aggressive dengue fever outbreak that hospitalized over 100,000 Cuban citizens. And at the same time of that outbreak, CIA planes were flying over Cuba and doing covert biological attacks against Cuba's citizens and crops, including a particularly nasty swine flu outbreak that Fidel Castro openly associated with the CIA.
Interesting.
And lastly, on that little note, before we go into the mind control stuff, I found a quote the reason that I did this sidebar is this quote, which is to say something from a CIA memo about the use of viruses on civilian populations. Quote, not all viruses have to be lethal. The objective includes those that act as short-term and long-term incapacitants. End quote. So just something to consider when you look at large outbreaks of viral infections that originate in countries hostile to American interests.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That doesn't sound familiar at all to me.
I can't.
Someone living in 2022.
So now returning to the mind control things.
Yeah.
A declassified CIA document from January 2nd, 1952 shows Artichoke operatives considered using hypnosis to create assassins. I read through this document. At one point, it theorizes that they could be used, quote, against a prominent redacted politician, or if necessary, against an American official.
Man.
And then an asterisk following the sentence leads to the bottom of the page where it says that this would be simulated only, right. Of course.
And of course.
And
Project Artichoke, this is early 1950s before MK Ultra.
So this is early 1950s. Hang on, let me see if I wrote down the exact date that Artichoke started. Of course,
August 20th, 1951.
Thank you. I do have the date that MK Ultra picks up, though.
Yes.
So yeah, from there, Project MK Ultra, which eventually we're just going to cover MK Ultra in its entirety, I'm sure.
It'll be a 7-part series.
Yeah, exactly. But it upped the ante even more. Speaking of which, Roswell, just a little pop quiz, fun fact for you. Do you know who pioneered the practice of administering psychedelic drugs to prisoners?
Who pioneered the practice?
Yeah, if you guessed Nazi scientists at the Dachau concentration camp, several of whom were later recruited by the CIA, you were correct.
I did not guess that. Wow.
Yeah, they administered mescaline to prisoners for psychological experiments, which is something that no one talks about, I've found. Like, a lot of people talk about the fact that LSD was, basically made by the CIA, and then mysteriously escaped the lab and became this whole tool for freedom.
Right.
Which,
Yeah, right.
I'm sure. But no one really talks about the fact that psychedelic experiments in general were founded by the Nazis. I think that's a little something to consider if you want to delve into the
Yeah.
collective unconscious or go through the doors of perception.
Yeah.
Careful.
Careful. Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
MK Ultra was headed by Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, a wonderful gentleman from all accounts. It started on April 13th, 1953, and unfortunately, most of their documents were destroyed in the 1970s. So we don't know much about the depths of their hypnosis and mind control programs, but we do know they tried to ascertain which personalities were the most susceptible to hypnosis. That's a fact.
Did they find it was incels who were spurned by e-girls?
Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then anyway, because all the records were destroyed, we can only imagine and assume, I guess, that all of their attempts to control people's minds failed, and in shame, they destroyed their records. So no one would know.
Exactly.
So now we're going to enter the zone, the speculation zone, perhaps.
Sure.
Because, like I said,
bracing myself.
So that the CIA tried to develop mind control programs is a fact.
Right. That's
now,
known.
Whether or not they succeeded is the real question. And I think you and I imagine, probably come down on opposite sides of that fence.
I don't know if I'd say opposite.
Yeah. Or at least I dive off the end of the fence and you take a careful step.
Yes.
So this is the fun little thing I found. I found a quote from Richard Condon, author of The Manchurian Candidate. He wrote in the foreword of a 1978 book by Walter Boer, Boert, my mistake, called Operation Mind Control, the CIA's War Against America.
Interesting, I missed this one.
Yeah, and so Richard Condon wrote the foreword for this book, and I just have a little quote. The quotes are a little long, but after what you did, I don't feel bad about reading long quotes.
Sorry.
No, it was very interesting. So he says, quote, "Today, our secret police and our military establishment have demonstrated, in Vietnam and elsewhere, as examined by Boert herein, the powers to create assassins out of our children. The expansion of these powers, which are able to turn young men and women into murderous criminals at will, goes on unchecked by the oft-called, quote, investigative press, by, quote, moral leaders at the bar, in the pulpits, in high government, and on campuses. Yet the people they call the public have long suspected that it has become government policy to control minds. If there is general information abroad on this subject, then consider that which must be at the disposal of of congressional investigations committees, as they bungle their determination to control the powers of darkness within our secret police. Zombie is a quaint, old-fashioned folklore word, but its meaning becomes obscene when our children's minds are being controlled by any one of dozens of federal secret police agencies. Have government agencies perfected methods sustained by the taxpayers to control the minds of the people who shot the Kennedys, Martin Luther King, and Orlando Lettier, the former Chilean economist and diplomat? Were the assassins programmed to forget that they did it? Or were they programmed to do it? We may never know, for they stand bewildered, idiotically grinning for the cameras. Have the technicians developed a model giant, economy-sized government assassin, which can be easily turned out by the thousands? End quote.
We get it, Richard. You're a writer.
Yeah, I was like, man, Richard, you went off there.
You did go off. I'm imagining hand clapping emojis between every single word.
So yeah, as I looked through Operation Mind Control, it's honestly kind of crazy because it was written in 1978. So
yeah,
MK Ultra was considered to be like crank stuff at that point. Like that was not something that most people were talking about seriously.
All those what remained hadn't been declassified yet at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Like it wasn't until a little later the CIA were like, "LOL, yeah, we actually did do all that.
Yeah, we
Our
did
bad.
it.
Sorry, but we promised it didn't work." No, you can't see the proof that it didn't.
We're going to be 70 when they go like, yeah, we did COVID, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing, is I keep saying, like, I know that, like, I'll, like, ruin my daughter's wedding or something.
Absolutely.
Because, like, they'll declassify documents about 9/11, and I'll just stand up and scream, like, I was right.
As we all live in underground tunnels because the surface of the earth is too hot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And now, so I scrolled through Operation Mind Control. Nothing too crazy. But nothing too like super interesting or useful outside of the fact that the foreword was written by the guy who wrote The Manchurian Candidate.
Yeah, that is very interesting.
Now the other thing, it's finally time for us to take a little look at an important book, which is to say one Dave McGowan's Program to Kill.
We made it,
and I'm not going to go too into the actual plot of the, well, not plot, but the actual like point that he's getting to, which is he argues that serial killers were used as sort of a domestic gladio mind control type thing, and controlled using MK Ultra things. Now, we will get into our thoughts on that, I'm sure, some other episode.
Yes.
But I focus on the intro, where he dedicates himself more to arguing that mind control is a possible thing.
Sure.
And actually, going back to your discussion of the communists using it, he quotes, hang on, where is it? A quote from Verdier is the name of this guy who wrote some stuff on brainwashing. He wrote, quote, Russian political scientists do support the belief that given enough punishment, all the people in any time or place are susceptible to hypnotic control. And he has a little footnote there, which leads to him saying, this is a very common form of disinformation that is frequently found in the writings of CIA-affiliated writers. Acknowledge that mind control is a real phenomenon, but then blame it all on those godless communists. Other agency-penned manuscripts deny that mind control exists at all, which is another common form of disinformation. And that's McGowan's style for you, in a nutshell, right there. But he argues about how, like, why would an intelligence agency not want to do something like this? To create a spy who can effectively enter a dissociative state. And he goes into a, I think, fairly compelling example of showing that all people are susceptible to those, just mild ones, right? Like he talks about, they call it driving on autopilot. Like you get in the car and then all of a sudden you're at your destination, you have no memory of driving. Obviously, you weren't like hypnotized by this, but on some level, you dissociate a little bit. You went into autopilot. Your mind was elsewhere while you were doing it. And he argues that whether or not they succeeded, he argues that the CIA would definitely want to look into doing something like that. He says, quote, hang on, here it is. As dubious as Estabrook's scenario may first appear to be, and he's talking about the idea of like a super spy who can go on a mission without remembering the details because he doesn't know he's on a mission, and then be deprogrammed when he gets back, say by being presented with a card of some sort or something. Let's see. So he says, as dubious as Estabrook's scenario may at first appear to be, it's not so very different from the common phenomenon of driving on autopilot. Let us imagine that you have managed, once again, to find yourself at work with no idea how you got there. You remember nothing beyond pulling out of your driveway, so you decide, out of curiosity, to pay a visit to a skilled hypnotist who succeeds in putting you under, so to speak. While in this hypnotic trance, another term for a dissociative state, you would be able to relate to the hypnotist and anyone else in the room all the mundane details of your drive to work. Once brought back to a normal state of consciousness, however, you would still have no conscious memory of your drive to work unless instructed otherwise by the hypnotist. You would have served, in essence, as a super spy. All that is missing from the equation is the element of control.
Interesting.
And so that's the basic program to kill hypothesis, which is something that I personally am quite compelled by, as we've noted before.
And I just promise, Matt, I'm going to read it one day.
Eventually, one day, we'll do that as a big special episode. That'll be our very special episode as we sit down and just read Program to Kill in its entirety.
Together. We could do a fireside read of it.
Oh, I would love a fireside read.
Mug of hot cocoa.
Yeah.
Yes, that's very interesting. Can I interject?
Please. I was hoping you would.
Well, so in line with this like idea of brainwashing to the essentially of the control of it, right? So now this is obviously according to CIA themselves, so I don't trust this as far as I can throw the entire Central Intelligence Agency, but this is what they said, and I think it's important to note on the scientific research of mind control that in obviously MK Ultra, the idea was brainwashing, it was control, but Sidley Gottlieb himself said even though they didn't supposedly achieve this goal, they were able to, quote, blast away the existing mind of a human using torture techniques. And like inserting a new personality into the void they created was not successful, at least at that time. And there are people who disagree with this like, for example, psychiatrist Colin A. Ross, who is also controversial, and maybe we'll look into him later. But so the idea is, we know scientifically you can destroy someone's mind,
Which
especially,
is
yeah,
it's a crazy thing for Sidney Gottlieb to admit that openly. It's like, yeah, we
yes,
can blast a person's consciousness
yes,
away.
using LSD and torture and God knows what else, right? But the interesting thing, and I think the difficult part, is what Dave McGowan is alleging here, which is that you could have a person be a person and then dissociate and have a second personality whose actions they don't remember and are under the control of another agency. And that's interesting, but I could not find anything outside of the more fringe stuff
Yeah.
that backed this up. But that being said, as a counterpoint to myself, to kind of give you a little bit of credit, the scientific research on brainwashing outside of the stuff we found from the 50s, very scant. So,
yeah. Which, if you're a little more paranoid, you might say is possibly by design, right? You don't. If you're doing illegal human experimentation programs, you're not going to want other people to do the legal human experimentation programs and draw attention to yours.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's fine. I'm not like offended at all by you like acknowledging that my sources were a little more fringe. I think I've consistently, delved a little more into the weirder sources while you stick closer to the official ones, which is fine. I think we got to have that little dialogue going.
Yes.
But yeah, I just think it's an interesting thing, and I don't know. I would like to close the episode, unless you have anything else to say, by asking you a question.
Oh, before we do that, did you
Yes.
not want to talk about JFK in relation to the Manchurian Candidate?
I completely forgot. Please,
Yeah.
I'll let you kick this off, and then I'll sound in when I feel appropriate.
So I have some fun quotes to read about the JFK connection to the Manchurian Candidate.
Those videos you sent me were great.
For the listeners, I found what was the video called?
Hang on, let me pull it back up. It was a video of a guy filming his TV, like standing up with a camera. Richard Condon knew who was going to kill JFK is the title of
and
it.
He's just talking. You can't quite hear him, and there's a glare to the TV. Actually, I think it's like his laptop screen too. Actually,
yeah, it rules.
It's pretty sick. So, and he's got it's like 13 videos, all the same name posted. It's just the same thing. They're all like 30 seconds long.
He's talking over the movie, so you can't hear either of them.
Pretty sick. But anyway, yeah. So obviously, the book is written in 1959. The movie is released in 1962. JFK is assassinated in 1963.
I believe so. Hang on.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm ashamed of myself for not remembering this.
I'm pretty sure it's 1963.
Yeah, November 22nd. Okay. That I did know, 1963.
So I want to read a quote. This is, again, I believe from The Best Bad Novel by Louis Menand, New Yorker. But it's sort of about some of the connections to JFK and this movie. So, quote, Frank Sinatra, who plays Captain Marco, the only friend Raymond has, is supposedly asked his friend Jack Kennedy for his approval before the movie was released. United Artists were apparently afraid that the assassination scene might give some nut an idea. Kennedy, as it happened, loved the movie. He was, after all, the world's most famous Ian Fleming fan. He was killed a year after The Manchurian Candidate came out. Did Lee Harvey Oswald see it? The problem has been examined in depth by John Locken in a book called Oswald's Trigger Films from 2000. Locken concludes that although the evidence is not definitive, Oswald almost certainly did see it. Excuse me. The Manchurian Candidate opened in Dallas in November 1962 and played there for several months. Oswald, who was living in Dallas at the time, had a habit of going to the movies by himself. He was in a movie theater when he was arrested on November 22nd, 1963, after shooting Kennedy. Locken has determined that the bus Oswald probably took to work passed within 10 yards of a theater where the movie was playing, confirmed. Locken is most struck by the fact that the references to the Manchurian Candidate are almost non-existent in the literature, official and otherwise, on the Kennedy assassination. He concludes, in the spirit of all scholars of that assassination, that the probable Oswald connection, so utterly obvious if one thinks about it, has been suppressed for decades by a powerful conglomerate that might aptly be called the media entertainment complex. And then here's a second quote, which was, immediately after Kennedy was shot, Richard Condon got a call from a newspaper reporter asking if he felt responsible. Condon could not see the relevance, and he was not being defensive. He had not introduced political assassination to popular American culture. All the King's Men in 1949, and We Were Strangers the same year. Lewis Allen's Suddenly, 1954, also starring Frank Sinatra. All of these had a political assassination in them, and Oswald could have easily seen all of these movies. But this is the part of the quote and the reason I pulled this second quote, which is, more to the point, The Manchurian Candidate is a story of a man programmed to kill at the command of other people. What self-respecting assassin would take such a character for his role model? Either Oswald acted according to his own wishes, in which case he wasn't imitating Condon's killer, or he really was programmed by the communists, in which case the question isn't whether Oswald saw Frankenheimer's movie, but whether his communist masters did, end quote. So that second one was a little more ancillary, but the fact that it said programmed to kill specifically, I thought you'd like.
Well, we got to read it. You're like, I know that Matt's going to be quoting this one, so let's just have this in the chamber for when it comes up.
But ostensibly, like, it's very, very strong possibility that Lee Harvey Oswald saw this film.
Yeah, he saw this film and then decided to act alone and shoot JFK and then call himself a patsy when he was caught. You know, just as you always do when you see a movie.
Yeah, right. So it's one of those things where I'm like, I don't exactly know what to conclude to this other than it's just sort of sus, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same as, like, I don't know. There's also, especially when an assassination occurs, the media that the victim consumes is always... frequently, it's sort of ominous, right? Like, you know, Abraham Lincoln very famously seeing Julius Caesar like 30 times before his assassination. Like, you're like, hey, buddy, come on, watch something else, please. You're manifesting something I don't like.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think it's definitely interesting to consider that. And it's interesting to consider the parallels if you're, you know, like me, a little less interested in whether Lee Harvey Oswald watched the movie and was like, well, I need to kill the president to impress Jodie Foster. Wait a minute. No, that's, no, sorry, my mistake. That was the other programmed presidential assassinate.
Right.
But, you know, I'm less interested in that and more in whether or not Lee Harvey Oswald was also programmed to kill.
Right.
But
yeah. And so I guess sort of in summation, do you think that brainwashing is... I know what the answer to that. So I'll say, how plausible do you think it is that brainwashing of that level and of control exists?
Yeah, so I was going to ask you the same question. I'm glad we were on the same page as to how to wind this one out. I think the answer is, I'm more likely to believe that than the average person, I think, just based off of my reading.
Yeah.
But I think it definitely doesn't occur like it does in the movies, right? Like, I don't think you read someone a code word and then all of a sudden they're stone cold killer, or they're back to being like Joe from down the street. I think a lot of it really does have to do with much uglier things, right? Like torture through years, or very intense and controlled childhood trauma, you know, possibly through like the more satanic ritual aspects of things that were going off, or other things like that. But I think it's something that is possible, and I definitely believe has happened throughout America's history in particular. You know, like Sirhan Sirhan is the example I always point to, right? Guy who killed RFK. But yeah, that's the answer I'd give you. Is I think it's possible. I think it happens, but I don't think it happens like the movies. And I don't know. I don't think it's something that's as easily controlled as people think, but I do think it's something where you can control it, in the very least sometimes.
Okay.
Or just point the gun in the right direction and let them figure out the rest.
Right.
So to speak.
Yeah. And so I guess we're on a similar page. I'm probably a little more reserved about it than you. I would not rule it out as a possibility, but like, I think it's a less sensationalistic, obviously, than the movies make it. It's not going to be some machine or some sort of, like fanciful tactic. It's going to be more like the tactics we read from thought reform.
Yeah.
This communist thought reform, which is essentially just torture and psychological torture and physical torture. And also, like you said, child abuse.
Which,
because
when we get the stomachs for it, I'm sure we'll discuss that at some point. But
and I mean,
we're
just
not looking forward to it.
No, we're not. But briefly, like, if people who have child abuse obviously have more the likelihood of, increased violence or increased, all of that stuff. So listen, it's not a foreign idea that the people like the FBI and the CIA would, I don't want to say, what's the term? Not frame, but entrap, persuade someone who's already kind of shaky mentally, and then just kind of like point them in the direction they want to go and have them lead a destructive path.
Yeah, this is something I would argue they do a lot.
Yeah.
But I'm, again, like you said earlier, I'm probably a little more gung-ho about that accusation than most people would be. But
sure. And I'm not saying, I'm saying, like, I could see, like, I absolutely don't doubt that the CIA, if they had brainwashing, wouldn't be doing this stuff, because of course they would be, because it acts, you have to think about what are the interests of the people who could do something like this. And we'll talk about that later with the CIA, but like, I could see them based on like a lot of their goals for control. Absolutely. This would be
for sure.
something they do. Yeah. And so whether or not every single serial killer has been MK Ultra'd, I'm a little more kind of iffy on.
Yeah. But, and, if I may speak just candidly about my thoughts on Program to Kill as a whole, I think it's a book where Dave McGowan really is at his strongest when he sometimes as it comes to the sources or the facts, he's a little shaky as to where they all come from, right? It's extensively sourced, but sometimes the sources aren't the best. But what he's best at, I think, as you read through it, is just sort of pointing to a lot of weird things, or just pointing out every inconsistency in a case and going like, I'm seeing a pattern here. It's very similar, I'd say, to like Tom O'Neill's Chaos about the Mansons, where at the end he doesn't really produce a definitive smoking gun, but he raises a lot of questions. And I think Program to Kill in particular is a book that I've described it to other people where I was trying to pitch it to them. Where I'm like, even if it isn't a book that is 100% like factually true, it is, I think, spiritually true on a level where it understands like MK Ultra and the just, I don't know, the moral emptiness that you need to do things like try and destroy a human being and replace their mind.
You think the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, and that sort of
exactly. Yeah.
And I think I would agree with that. And it's another one of those things where like when you do this type of research, you just inevitably run across a lot of what do you call that? Circumstantial evidence. A lot of it which paints a certain picture or adds up in interesting patterns, but it is all circumstantial. Does that mean it's not useful? No. But like you said, there's just no smoking gun. There's no, knife in the murder room. So,
yeah. At the end of the day, we have to, acknowledge not all of these sources are created equal, right? The CIA isn't ever going to go on their website and go like, and here's our second photo of the man standing behind Lee Harvey Oswald holding another gun, giving a thumbs up, right? Like,
right.
So sometimes you just have to piece together what you can.
George Bush.
Yeah. The guy from the mailroom, actually.
Yeah,
the future president had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, so I guess that's sort of where I'm at. Anything else you want to say?
No, I think that's about it. So we'll just real quick plugs. Hey, follow us on Twitter and Instagram. We've got we're building up a couple followers on both platforms.
Yeah.
Some lovely people. So we are at Hist Esoteric on Twitter. And we are at Historica Esoterica on Instagram. Give us a follow there. Reach out to me. Tell me what you think. I've had a couple people tell me that they've liked the show so far. And if you're one of them, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for listening.
Oh, and if you can, please write us a review and leave us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Just so we can get these insane ramblings out to other people too.
Yeah. Yeah, let me be clear, everybody. I will not consider this podcast successful until one of us mysteriously dies in a canoeing accident, and
the other one commits suicide with 2 gunshots to the back of the head.
Yeah, because he's just so distraught over
of course.
The death of his co-host. And basically, I'm just saying, until we get some good reviews going on Apple Podcasts, that's not going to happen. We won't die mysteriously until that occurs. So you gotta help us.
Don't review us under any circumstances.
So wait a minute, yeah. To be clear, don't tell your friends about this podcast. Don't even follow us. Make sure we stay as small as possible.
Yeah.
But with all that said, thank you for listening, and remember, it's all connected.
At a flick of a switch, we can adjust character, change personality.
How much do you actually know about your friend?
I served under him. He was a good man.
That's what the neighbors always say about serial killers.
Somebody got into our heads with big steel-toe boots, cable cutters, and a chainsaw, and they went to town. Neurons got exposed, and circuits got rewired. Our brain cells got obliterated, man.